Hi, welcome to SACAC's inaugural webinar. My name is Lauren Sefton, the past president of SACAC, and I'm so excited for you to join us today. This is a brand new technology for us, so please bear with us as we're developing this effort. In this particular webinar, we're going to feature a handful of interviews with SACAC members who are contributing to the major conversations in our industry. The themes we selected for this webinar, access issues in higher education, and the coalition application, were major topics at our conference in Miami. If you were able to join us for our golden anniversary, we hope you had a great time. If you were unable to join us, we hope this gives you a glimpse into some of the discussions we had in the hallways. Our contributors presented on these very topics in Miami, and the questions posed to our contributors came straight from you. In the future, SACAC aims to host a live webinar every single month. We'll post links to recordings of these webinars in the Knowledge Center section of our brand new SACAC website, which we hope you've also had a chance to explore. Please enjoy this inaugural webinar, as well as some of the future professional development opportunities that SACAC brings to you throughout the year. Thank you for joining us.
I'm Erin McCubbin, and I'm here with Sarbeth Fleming from Westminster.
Yes.
And we're excited to tackle some of the questions that the SACAC membership had in regard to access, and particularly around some community-based organizations. Sarbeth, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Again, my name is Sarbeth Fleming. I'm at Westminster currently. Prior to Westminster, I worked on the collegiate side, and I worked at several different colleges, and my focus has always been community-based organizations, access, inclusion, diversity, multicultural outreach. And so I've done that for 15 years now.
Wow.
Yes.
So can you tell us some CBOs that you've worked with before, ones that maybe some of our membership don't know about and some that they're more familiar with?
Absolutely. Some that I've worked with that are phenomenal organizations: Prep for Prep, LEADA, White Foundation, Yes Prep in Texas. So there are a lot of different ones. Some are regionally based. 100 Black Men Alliance in Charlotte, KIP is one that is more national. Some of the bigger national ones, you have ABC, you have Breakthrough Collaborative. So there are a lot of different types of CBOs out there.
And if I was working on the college side and I didn't know how to find a CBO,
Yes.
Where do I start?
Well, there's a lot of great resources, and I'll share these. Some great links. NPEA, which is the National Partnership of Education Alliance, and that is an umbrella organization for community-based organizations. So if you log on to NPEA's website, it will have CBOs listed by if it's a national or more of a state or regional community-based organization. And then you can also look on NACAC, also has some resources for community-based organizations.
Awesome. So if you encounter a student who isn't a part of a CBO and doesn't have the support at home,
Right.
How then, in your experience, can you best support that student?
What I typically do is it's really important to build that level of trust with the student because the college process will ask so much personal questions of what are your parents' education level? What is the income level? And those aren't things that students typically share with their teachers or counselors. So building that relationship, but also working with the students to find out the information. I have students who will say, Ms. Fleming, I don't know about my financial aid. I don't know where my dad is, and my mom is not available. And so sitting down with that student and having them to still make the phone call, but I'm in the room, I'm helping them, I'm showing them the numbers, I'm giving them the questions to ask. And a lot of the colleges will have information on their website of if you're a first generation student, you are assigned a financial aid counselor.
Okay.
And so it's not just the admissions part, but it's also the financial aid piece that it sometimes can be a little too much for the students. But just finding those resources that are already out there on the college's websites, because colleges do a great job with trying to give that information out, attending programs. That's something that we strongly encourage our students to find the programs in the area so that if there's a financial aid night and they know that their parents may not be able to really be great resources through this process, to encourage teachers as well. Teachers that you know that the students have great relationships with and say, hey, I know this student is going to come to you. Can you come to the financial aid night to help them navigate? And I'm here as well.
That's awesome.
So those resources that are already out there that are completely free, but it gives the student more of knowledge to navigate the process.
That's great. So for, let's say, a public school counselor who is doing social, emotional, academic advising and college counseling and wearing all of those many hats, they can't necessarily dedicate as much time to college counseling, as an independent counselor. What advice would you have, if they're going to really focus their time, how can they best support those students who maybe don't have access to a CBO with their limited time as well?
That is a wonderful question. Both of my parents are retired from the school system, public school system. So I saw that firsthand growing up, where I know some public school counselors have to deal with this kid doesn't have food. And so I'm more looking at the necessities versus the aspiration part. And so I would suggest for those public school counselors to try to find a connection with an independent school or a nearby school that has more college resources out there for students. And so there are certain public schools, every single time we have a program here at Westminster, I email those public school counselors and they can put those in the newsletter. So they're not going out and having to research and find it. I know that their duties are so spread out that if I just shoot them a quick email and it's already typed up, and it's because they reached out to me and said, hey, let me know when you're having programs. And so their simple one phone call, now for 2-3 years, I've been sending that information out. And so even though that might only be 10 to 15% of their students that are thinking about the types of colleges or half of their time, they can still get that information and still participate in the events and have enough time to focus on all of their other duties.
Well, do you have any other tips or tricks with all of your experience with working with CBOs and seeing both sides of the desk? Anything else you'd like to share?
The thing I would say with CBOs is that it's a partnership, and the best partnerships with the CBOs are when the students, the parents, the CBOs, and the high school counselors all work together as a team. And so it is not a competition of the student is only talking to their CBO, but it's more of if the student is more comfortable talking to their CBO advisor as a high school counselor, then I should know who that person is and I should be okay picking up the phone and talking to them. So looking at it as a partnership. And then on the college side, I would say there are hundreds of CBOs out there, and just really researching them and finding the ones that already are meeting your institution priorities. And so if a CBO is working with a group of students that you're trying to recruit to your students, to your college, then that's the CBO that you should find versus there are CBOs out there and you're like, I'm not having a problem recruiting that base of students. So look for other CBOs and other opportunities out there.
Good morning. My name is Anita, Alston, and I work at the Lovett School in Atlanta, Georgia. Before my experience with the Lovett School, I was at Elon University, my alma mater, for a number of years.
So we're excited to chat with Anita today with some of your questions regarding access for our students as a follow-up from the SACAC conference. So Anita, we'll jump right in. You ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So in your experience, both on this side of the desk and on the college side, do you have any maybe atypical or unique organizations that you've worked with before that have really helped serve students from underrepresented backgrounds?
I feel like my response to that is a little bit biased. I used to recruit in the Southeast, so there were some organizations, and some of them are considered CBOs that kind of helped me with our diversity recruitment in particular. Any student that may have been from an underrepresented population. I really loved working with C5 or Get to College, which Get to College, I've given them a shout out because I think that they think a little outside of the box about how they support their students with every part of the application process, but also with retention once they do get to college. I also think about maybe the Quest Center in Naples, Florida, which is doing something pretty interesting, and they have a whole center set up for their students, and it's a pretty wonderful organization. So there are a few out there that I remember from the recruitment days that have been doing some really interesting things. I will actually go off a little bit and share that for any organization that wants to do some of those think outside of the box types of opportunities for your students, don't hesitate to look on our website, the SACAC website, to apply for funds using the Extend the Dream professional grant program.
Awesome.
They offer a lot of funding every year for counselors and for folks who are advocating for their students, particularly students who may not have the means to support themselves. So the chair for that is actually Ashley Young now, who's at Drew Charter High School in Atlanta.
That's awesome. That's a great resource to remember to share with folks.
Absolutely.
So as we think about the students that we serve on the college counseling side, oftentimes we're working with students from underrepresented backgrounds who are not a part of a CBO or another organization. In your experience, how do you find serving these students works? Is there any tips that you would share with other counselors?
Sure. You know, I think it's interesting, particularly for this question, because I am a first-generation student. And so when I think about first-generation students in particular, it's really hard to it can be time consuming, I think, because many of these students don't even know what questions to ask. And you're counseling the entire family, most likely.
Sure.
And for the colleges, you're recruiting the entire family. And so I think that patience is key, but I also think that just being able to walk through the many different resources, as well as walk through the college timeline and giving them a timeline. You might have to do a little more work about giving a student a plan versus just doing the typical that you might do with the majority of your students who are a little more savvy because their parents didn't go to college. And so to know about FAFSA or even prior, I mean, those things probably don't come up in conversation at home because they wouldn't know about them. So I would certainly say patience, but also walking them through the different resources that are available. Free resources. I think test prep is a big one for those families. And there are lots of test prep organizations that I think that would be willing to work with a family that maybe doesn't have the finances. And so I think that that's something that we'd have to get creative about, certainly.
So with your experience being a first generation year student yourself and ones you've worked with, these conversations don't always naturally happen. A student doesn't volunteer that information to you. So how do you ask the right questions to figure out how to best serve the students in your population?
So for some of our students, I will say I have the great privilege of working at an institution that sometimes provides that information kind of going out the gate. And so we work with, it might have been our admissions office that has that on file. We also have a survey that we ask our students to complete in their junior year just to give us more information about the student. So before they walk into my office, I already know. And I know that might not be possible for many populations because you may not have the time to create something like that. But maybe in your first meeting, you have a set of questions that looks like a survey. And so you can ask that question. And maybe you don't ask, are you a first generation student? Because many first generation students don't even know what that is. And so you talk about what a first generation student might be and if they might feel that they qualify or they fall into that category.
Do you do that survey through Naviance, through Google Docs?
Yes, we do it through Naviance. But I would certainly say, I would be happy to even pass along some of the questions for those of you who don't use Naviance, pass along some of the questions that maybe we ask that could be helpful for you as you work with different populations on your campus, particularly those who maybe you don't have the capacity to do a survey and have students fill it out, but when they come and meet with you, you can have a few questions.
Specifically like school counselors who are serving populations of multiple hundreds of students. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll work to have some of those resources and questions available.
That would be great.
Through the webinar. So you'll have a link at the end of this presentation to see. That would be awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today, Anita.
Yes.
And we look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining us, Mary Tipton. We're so excited that you're here. As a member institution, I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the Coalition app. What's the target audience? What are you all expecting it to provide to the community?
Sure. Well, the Coalition application schools have looked at the landscape in college admission and responded to a couple of different things that we see in the marketplace. First, as many people recall and lived through in 2013 with the common application and some concerns surrounding the rollout that year, Coalition member schools began to talk about an alternative to the common application. So that's certainly one motivation. But that's really a small part of the motivation. The much larger motivation is thinking about the huge numbers of students in the United States that don't have access to the resources of many of our member institutions here in SACAC. They're in low and under-resourced schools or communities without access to tools that we're used to using in college planning and application process. And we thought, well, surely we could put together our collective wisdom to think of a way that we can provide these students with tools to try to even the playing field. So that was really the start of the Coalition application. The target audience is frankly any student that's applying to college or even thinking about applying to college in the future. But I think we are making extra effort through some national efforts, through grassroots efforts in our own state and local areas to try to reach students who, again, in low and under-resourced schools and communities that may not have access to the tools that we're so used to thinking about, and trying to give them, to level the playing field a little bit for them by giving them some college planning tools, exposing them to colleges that they may not think are attainable to them. This is all part of the goal to outreach and access with the Coalition.
Okay, and so you mentioned that institutions are making efforts to specifically target these under-resourced or low-resource students. What are some examples of that? Like, how are they going to learn about the locker, or what efforts will Georgia Tech be making to spread that message?
Yep, I can give perfect examples of what we're planning to do in our own state, and we're really just starting to think about this. So I think that obviously the sky is the limit. There's always more that we can do. But looking ahead to next year, we every year partner with our colleagues at the University of Georgia and at Georgia State, and we have done some consortium travel in the state. Next year, we'll be expanding the scope of that so that we are doing a program within 50 miles of all people in the state of Georgia. So that's getting us into some rural pockets of Georgia that a lot of us haven't been to in quite a while. And we're excited about being able to get out and talk about our institutions and talk about some of the issues that are facing students and families as they're thinking about applying to college. We'll also be doing programs for counselors when we're in those areas, so we can talk to the folks that are working with students on a day in and day out basis. That's going to the people. Just on that daily on our website, we're starting to envision ways that we can talk about college planning resources for younger students. I know that sometimes people get a little anxious when you start to think about talking to middle schoolers or early high schoolers about college. And I think we do have to be cautious about that, certainly. We want to do it in a way that is helping to expose students who may not be thinking about college to Georgia Tech and schools like us being a possibility for them, but also in a way that doesn't add to the stress and the anxiety that a lot of families already feel about the college going process, and help make it a part of their conversation without making it more part of their stress level.
Sure. And so thinking about maybe some of those early high school students, there's a lot of talk around freshmen and sophomores potentially starting to use the locker. We know it would definitely be a great resource for juniors and early and senior year. How do you envision students using the locker? What will they put in it? How will you interact with the locker?
Yep, so we actually don't interact with the locker. That's the most important thing for everyone to know. The locker is the students. Colleges don't have access to a single thing in the locker until a student decides to get it out of the locker and share it with us. And well, we're only going to have access to it or look at it if we want to see it. It's a part of our application process. So the whole purpose of the locker, and John Gaines at SACAC from Vanderbilt really talked about when his students were going through the college application process, and throughout high school actually, they had an accordion file. So sort of a low-tech version of the locker today. They had an accordion file, and after a great concert in freshman year, or a newspaper clipping, or a nice paper they had written for a class, they just stuck it in the accordion file. And then when it came time 3 years later to start thinking about college applications, they could dump the accordion file out of the kitchen table and look at some of the things that they may or may not remember as being important or being nice accomplishments, and help them pull together their college application. So now imagine doing that in an electronic space. And the nice part about this too is not only is there the locker which students control, but then students can also invite a counselor or a teacher or a mentor or a parent or friend to come into the collaboration space with them and comment to them about things that they think are important or not important in the locker. So now all of a sudden you can have a running commentary on items that are in the locker that students have chosen to share in a collaborative space. This is still not something that colleges are a part of. This is still something that students are controlling. They're inviting other people into this space to help them to evaluate materials they put there and think about putting that together in a college application. So I can almost think of it as, you can think of it as the old-fashioned paper accordion file. You can think of it as kind of a journal or a scrapbook of things you've done throughout high school. I think when you approach it with that mindset, it does take some of that anxiety out. It's just, oh, I'm just saving these things that matter to me now. We'll see if they're still helpful later when I start to think about applying to college.
It makes me think about a resume. We always call a resume a living document. And this is like a living expando file of all of the accomplishments.
That is a great way to think about it. It's exactly that kind of thing.
Okay, well, 2 points of clarification. So if somebody comments, like if I provide a comment for one of my students as a counselor, that comment, do you see it if that student chooses to share something?
No, they would be sending just a clean document to us. Yes, but it would be a space where they could think of this as a Google document, or you might share a track changes document in your office. And then that's not what you actually submit in the end. You send the clean document. That's the whole idea of the collaborative space, or one of the ideas of the collaborative space.
Perfect. Well, another tool that a lot of counselors use is Naviance. At least in our school, in the independent setting, we send all of our documents through Naviance, letters of recommendation, transcripts, things like that. So some of the membership had some questions around how the Coalition app might be working with Naviance, or how you anticipate receiving documents if you're a Coalition app school.
Yes, that's a great question. So I understand from the sessions that I attended at SACAC that the Coalition is in conversation with Naviance to try to make a connection there. Beyond that, I think the most important thing is no one loves electronic documents probably more than the college admission offices that are receiving them. It's less human power, manpower to literally open mail and unfold it and take out the staples and all these things you have to do when you get paper, because a lot of us are now reading in an electronic format. We read on a computer, and so if something comes in paper, it has to be transitioned into an imaged file. Whereas if it comes in as an electronic document, that obviously takes out a lot of steps in that process. And so we also have a huge motivation to find ways to let students submit as much as possible electronically. The nice thing about the way the Coalition is setting themselves up is they know that only about 25% of high schools in the United States use Naviance. So really they're thinking beyond just that one tool and looking at that other 75% of schools that don't have tools like this. What can we do to give them some platform to submit electronic documents? And then they're also thinking about the fact that there are students that go to schools where the counselors may not be able to handle the load of students that they're trying to help get to college. And so let's put some of the responsibility back in the student hands. So high school counselors will be able to upload documents into a student's space in the Coalition platform. They can upload transcripts and letters of recommendation that the students will never see. It's kind of like the old-fashioned way when a counselor used to hand you an envelope that was sealed with a signature across it. It's the same idea, but in an electronic space again. So it's there, the student can move it, but they can't open it. And so now it puts the responsibility in the student's lap to know that at Georgia Tech, I need to send these 2 pieces of information. At the University of Georgia, maybe these other 2 pieces of information. Students are really back in the driver's seat with controlling the information that's going to school. So I like that. We're making students more responsible in their whole college admission process. That's part of what getting ready to go to college is all about. And hopefully it takes a little bit of pressure off of high school counselors, but it also is opening up this electronic submission to all the schools out there that don't have a platform like that already in place.
Mary Tipton, I'll be super honest. I hadn't even thought about the access part of the Coalition mission applying to counselors.
Right.
But that really is a way that it does.
I know we're so used to Naviance and talking about those kinds of tools, but then you think about the fact that most high schools don't have that. They may have other ways that they're submitting documents electronically, but here is another avenue for them.
Excellent. That doesn't cost them anything.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, as a member institution, are there any other things that you feel like the SACAC membership needs to know about the coalition application and kind of what to expect down the line?
Sure. Well, first off, I would say the website is being updated with new information. So I know a lot of people have realized now that the essay questions for the coalition application are now out on the coalition website. So that is certainly a great resource. There's actually some really nice demos. If you haven't been able to see one at a conference or in another setting, there's some great demos about what does the locker actually look like, what does the collaborative platform look like, and counselors can go out there and see that already. I'm excited because, as has also been announced this week, Coalition has a new executive director, and I think that is going to really move the organization in the right direction in terms of organizing communication out to counselors and students and families that are thinking about using this platform. I think that will really help everyone as we make this transition or make this new platform sort of come into the scope of our world. And then last but not least, I think in every case, we've been able to say, this is not meant to be a panacea. We don't think that is what this is going to be. There is not one solution to solving the access problem with our college-going population in the U.S. But everybody taking a stab at it or thinking about new and creative ways to try to get more students exposed to college and exposed to what it takes to apply successfully to college, I think that's a good thing. I think that is at the root of what the coalition is attempting to do. And we are excited about partnering with our high school colleagues in really making this work.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And we'll link some of the resources that Mary Tipton talks about on this webinar. So if you have questions, you'll be able to find those directly. All right, I'm here with Steve Frappier from the Westminster Schools, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about the coalition application, specifically the coalition counselor community. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to chat about coalition.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we collected a number of questions that you all had for us about the coalition application. It was a big conversation at the SACAC Conference. And we're going to start from the very beginning. What is the coalition counselor community?
Yeah, so there's, since the launching of the coalition concept, there's been about 60 counselors worldwide that have been invited by coalition member leaders to kind of help iterate some of the aspects of the coalition, the application design, communications with counselors, developing FAQ. So there's about 60 counselors internationally. 2/3 of them are from public high schools and CBOs. So even though I'm here from a private school in college counseling, the vast majority are public and CBO members. And there's a couple subcommittees that many of us participate in some of the FAQ, that coalition has put out to us.
What are some of those subcommittees?
Yeah, so for instance, application design, council outreach, and a lot of this, all of us fully knowing this is a big project, that's going to be affecting and impacting a lot of people and processes, but gathering together different points of view on, this seems like it would work in my community, and other people within the counselor community saying, that wouldn't work in our community. So making sure that there's multiple points of feedback and from different types of high schools as we're trying to understand how to measure implementation.
That's great.
Yeah.
I know we're coming up on the end of April, which is the anticipated rollout for the locker.
Yeah.
Some of our questions from the community centered around that locker.
Yes. Yeah.
In particular, for freshmen and sophomore, some schools have really felt the pressure now to move to the comprehensive program since the locker is available. How do you anticipate at your school, and then just generally, how sophomores and freshmen might interact with the locker?
Yeah, and I think the coalition from the very beginning, and we fully know that not all counselors can attend conferences where coalition members have been speaking, but for the most part, this is an additional application module that is not replacing, the common application. There are a couple of colleges that are going to be coalition exclusive next year. Okay. University of Maryland, College Park, University of Washington, University of Florida are 3 of them of the 90 members. But for the most part, counselors might decide, am I going to be onboarding and incorporating this into the process? But the whole premise is to capture even more lower and lowest income and first generation students in the beginning of the process. And where I feel enthusiastic about it because I'm a first generation college attending student and my childhood was in Montgomery and Orlando. And even thinking of ninth grade, I'm producing things, I'm doing things, and then I would just lose them. I'd throw them away. I would, and then when it came time senior year to make an application, I'm like, I have no idea, which debate competitions I went to, what events I had, what is all this? So the whole premise of the locker, and to kind of borrow these other terms, is that they're meant to be more like a Dropbox for students to then just kind of self-curate, because, especially for boys, put it in your backpack, put it in your drawer. Like, sure. I don't have one of those, when I'm 12, 13, 14. And so to kind of post it there and then leave it there. The students will always have control of what is in that locker.
It's like a virtual filing cabinet.
It's a virtual filing cabinet. And then students have a choice through what's called the collaboration platform to invite mentors within their high school, within their community, their church, a parent, a relative. Will you help me curate my locker? So I have all this stuff, ninth grade, 10th grade throughout. And then when it's time for applying, are there additional, like what do you think stands out as something that I might want to submit as a supplement to my application?
So with that community member or family member, do they get to like star something to say it, or how do they give feedback? They
might, and think of it maybe like a Google document or a Word document where they might comment. Okay. And they might say, oh, this might be a good thing to include, or you know what, that was too early and you've had better stuff since then. Students might put things in there, not invite anyone. I can curate this myself. I might choose not to convert any of this into something that would be a supplement at a later point.
Does a college counselor at a high school have immediate access to their student's locker, or do they have to be granted access?
They have to be granted access in the current form of it.
So if I'm a counselor and I'm writing a letter of recommendation for my student and they're submitting a coalition application, do they get the same chance to be interactive with my documents as I am with theirs?
It's not two-way. So that's an important thing. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns is that, you can upload a transcript, you can upload multiple letters of recommendation, but it's important to know that the students can see that a document exists in their portfolio, if you will, but they can't see the content.
Just like Naviance.
Similar, yeah. Like, that there's that thing, if you're a Naviance using school, that it says completed or not completed.
Right.
Or if you're a Common App using school, you can see that green triangle on submission or not. And there'll be an equivalent of that. But it's not where students will then go, well, I'm also gonna curate which rec letters are the best. They're just going to see based on whom was invited, the letter's been posted or not.
Okay.
Right? And also, colleges cannot go into the student's locker. That's another very important aspect to this, that students will always have control, but it's not something where colleges, the coalition member schools, are then going to be able to peek behind the curtain in any way and be able to see what the students have in the locker. It's really designed. Invite only. Yeah.
Okay. So in thinking about, those 3 schools that are going coalition exclusive this next year, if I'm submitting transcripts on a student's behalf and I use Naviance for 99% of my other applications, can I still submit via Naviance for those 3 schools?
They're working on that right now with Hobson's, right? And I don't know to what the timeline might be, if there is a timeline. But that is a big TBA regarding kind of how that will be an aspect for document submission. But at the same time, these, University of Florida, for example, has self-reported transcripts.
Oh, true.
Right? And they don't read rec letters, right? So just speaking to that one more specifically, a lot of these schools where we might be double hitting some of these schools where the students self-report GPA and then we send a transcript anyway, they may not need any high school-based support, right, for the student to express a complete application.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about it that way. So if I'm a counselor watching this webinar and I haven't had an opportunity to attend a session where the Coalition app has been presented, where do I find the best resources?
There's a couple that if you, the one main website for the Coalition where there's a lot of FAQ, it's a longer URL, but it's coalitionforcollegeaccess.org. Then from there's a lot of FAQ on what to expect, the locker. This is also intended to be available for transfer students in the very first year starting July 2016.
Oh, excellent.
If you're a transfer student eyeing a Coalition school for spring 2017 or the following year, it's designed to be transfer friendly as well.
Excellent. Well, Steve, is there any other insight you want to share from the high school perspective on the changes kind of coming to our community with the Coalition application?
I have always been one from the beginning, and there's a lot of discussion, but I see potential benefits, even though there may be, whenever there's a new thing that we all have to accommodate, but if the premise is, can we capture and get more students reflecting earlier and sooner in some way on what four-year college planning looks like, because I remember even at an IB school, I woke up junior year, or it was fall of senior year, and I hadn't taken SATs, and I hadn't, and I didn't know what subject tests were. And even, I was participating in a program that I was told to do at a public with no counseling. And yet, oh, now you got to apply to college. Well, when, and with what, and so I think if there's a gap that can be closed and for students to reflect on that, and this may not be the best application module for certain high schools and certain students. So this is not, it's very important to know that there is no admissions advantage on using Coalition or not. And I think if there's certain high schools that say, you know what, we're going to keep going with our current system and we're going to let Coalition, do its thing its first year, all that's the prerogative of the counselor. Okay. But for counselors that have questions, you can email info@coalitionapp.org, coalitionapp.org. Even though there's a group of about 60 college counselors that are part of this counselor community, any high school, any CBO college counselor can email info@coalitionapp.org to get information on potential onboarding. And the 90 Coalition schools are also dispatching different representatives in different communities to try to do more localized outreach programming versus, in addition, as a supplement to what's available and increasingly available in FAQ on the websites.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing such valuable information with us today. We really appreciate it, Steve.
Yeah, good to join you.
And I know that we will have lots of conversations, in the future as this rolls out, but we're really excited.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.